Hey BookTube, I decided I'd be a parasite on the back of a leech, on the back of Shawn the Book Maniac. Steve Donoghue reacting to the Queen of the Bales, Shawn the Book Maniac, a fellow who can, uh, I, to some way I can admire. He'll read a book, he'll get like a couple of pages into a book and go, nope, that isn't for me. Or he'll be reading along and he'll go suddenly like, ugh, I hate this. No way, I'm out, goodbye, for whatever reason. Mostly I think it's a lot of times it's the writing itself. A lot of times it's that. Sometimes it's I think sometimes it can be the story. But someone who has very quick judgments, a very keen reader, definitely. I'll put a link to his videos below. And Steve kind of had his reaction to this because Steve is a fellow who is a professional book reviewer, and this is all he does. He reads. He doesn't even wear pants. He reads so much. And he does professional reviews. So of course, whatever he's actually going to professionally review something, he reads it, but he's someone he's a very quick reader, a very thorough reader. And, he reads everything, and he does read all the way through. He's a very quick reader and he reads all the way through. And he wanted to talk about bales, because bales is something that he weighed. He did a whole weighing thing in this very kind of smart and methodical way of saying like the cons are like, you don't waste time if you bail. Number two, you kind of get away from that, oh, I ought to read something. It's like, no, you have a choice. You can not read it. You can choose not to read something if it's not pleasing you. And number three, that it gives a reader, especially maybe a reader's not as fast a reader as Steve, momentum. Like, instead of getting bogged down in a book, you say, nope, and you go on to the next one. He switched from that into his cons, of which was momentum. Is this false momentum that you're just simply you're zipping through the books, you're giving yourself a false sense of momentum because you're not actually getting any reading done. You're not completing stuff. Number two, that it's too narrow. I mean, he's really focusing on someone like Shawn here, who is capable of fairly rapidly being able to go, nope, not going to read that. Nope, not going to read that. Who's got very quick, sharp, finely honed judgment. I'll come back to that one later when I come to my own thing. And just sort of almost like he talked about Tinder of like, just basically swipe, nope, not that person, not that person. This is like, nope, not that book, not that book. You're not stopping to consider, not stopping to try and take a full depth of the thing. Number three, that he thinks that maybe being that high you get from bailing on a book, you get that's an addictive feeling, that isn't a cognitive, that isn't a thought out feeling, that's a chemical feeling of I just sort of I got to get through something, and the kind of that addictive high. So you're gonna don't get hooked on bailing, kids. And number four, that basically, some authors, they actually do put some chunky bits in books to either test readers, to communicate something, something, or in fact, sometimes books are very hard and difficult to read because the author is asking you to do something very different, and that can cause resistance at first. And just because you hit that kind of resistance doesn't mean you should bail. And I'd be interested to hear what Shawn would say about that, because Shawn isn't someone who I'd say is reading what you would consider just easy to read. He's an easy to read kind of comfort reader. He's obviously he reads stuff to challenge himself. So I don't think Steve is particularly looking at Shawn there, though maybe questioning Shawn, maybe you've missed some people because there has been that challenge. I guess that's all a matter of judgment. So he asked sort of like, what are other people's experiences with bailing, and bailing versus DNF, which I'll start off with that. When you bail on something, it seems to be, he characterizes it as this, nope, that's it, never going to look at it again. Whereas did not finish it, it holds the promise of, oh, I might come back to this, but I didn't finish it at the moment. In my own experience, those two words are that feels semantic to me. It's very rare that a book that I have not finished that I've actually not gone back to. In some ways, a DNF is a bail where it's like, I'm not blaming the book, but I'm not coming back to it. Whereas a bail is, this book pissed me off somehow and I'm throwing it across the room. I bail. So in some ways it's an amicable separation, but it's still a separation. So I don't know how much of a difference I see between bail and DNF. And I mean, that might come from different people. There's interesting thing of the whole idea of authors challenging a reader, because something that's very near and dear to Steve's heart, Moby Dick at the moment, is a book that I initially did not finish. I read up a certain distance into it, and I was like, nope, I couldn't get into that. And I was a much younger reader at the time, maybe, and I was just in a different spot. But then later on, I went, there was something in there that I guess it was a genuine did not finish. Really on the, I don't know what else is there other than Moby Dick that I've actually come back to that way. But I came back to Moby Dick, and I was like, did I read an expurgated version? Because there seems to be so much more in here, which probably means I wasn't paying attention enough, or my brain wasn't capable of pulling in as much stuff. And so that's a book that I did not finish and I came back to, and also a book that is very famous of having these info dump about the whaling industry in it. And indeed, that might have been where I hit the brick wall the first time. Whereas the second time, controversially, I actually love that section of the book now. To me, that section of the book is all about the character of Ahab, and about Ahab is obsessed with the whale, and he's like, that's all his mind is thinking about. And the author having this giant section in there, which is obsessed with all things whale, and just basically summing up every single scrap of info about whaling, whales, whaling, how we use whales, all that, and cramming it into this one section was sort of a way of going, this is obsession. This is here I am, kind of extra textually expressing that obsession. And I can see this is indeed what Steve would talk about. I guess I have to agree with Steve there. Here's a test for the reader. I don't consider that a flawed section. I don't consider that something that, you should skip over lightly. I think that's a part of the text. I think that's a part of what makes me enjoy, makes Moby Dick Moby Dick. I wouldn't lose that section for the world, where maybe some people who love Moby Dick would still say, you could lose that section. That's a section I want to reread to see if I still have the same reaction to it. I'm not doing the read along this year. It's NaNoWriMo at the moment, and I've cut my hands full just with that. Thanks, Steve. And then I think there's the whole thing of DNFing and versus bailing. There's also Steve talking about the bail review, and he's feeling like you shouldn't review a book if you haven't finished the entire book. And I mean, I agree. Like, if you were writing for the Christian Science Monitor or something like that, you probably shouldn't hand in a review of a book that you only read the first 100 pages of, as saying, and give your reasons why. But I think as an amateur reviewer, as someone who does stuff on Goodreads or on here, I think it's actually valuable as a group mind to have its value. I find it valuable myself to go through the thing and say, wow, I've looked at the reviews on Goodreads and there's a good 5 or 10 or 15 or 30 or 50 of people going, I couldn't finish it, and telling me why. And I can find that valuable because it's like, okay, those are all reasons why I think I would actually bail on the book myself. Or they're ones that make me go, okay, I'm interested in reading that because I don't think that doesn't sound like that would be enough to put me off. So I find that a legitimate reaction, and I think people who can express themselves well, as Shawn does a lot of times with why he's bailed on a book, it can give me enough info to, at least at the beginning. I'm also going to want to look at reviews of people doing full reviews, but I think, surveying the landscape and finding that, if 50% of the people who tried a book bailed on it, that gives me a heads up, at least for that I should gird myself that this might be a tough read. And I might not bail or DNF it myself, but I find that a valuable thing. I wouldn't find that a valuable thing in a professional reviewer, but the majority of us booktubers aren't professional reviewers, so that's not an issue, and I'm not expecting that level of professionalism and thoroughness, least of all from myself. And I guess the final thing is Steve was curious about, how quickly do you bail? Because yes, Shawn is a great shining beacon or hero or a warning beacon or just this. He's one extreme, and Steve, if Shawn is like, drop it immediately, and Steve is always finish it, then there's, all of us mere mortals in the middle. And for me, I can drag myself through books for weeks, reading slower and slower, and it bogging me down, and until I find I'm reading a different book, and I don't even consciously bail. I just I'll get back to that later, and then it's a year. It's more like 3 or 4 weeks later, and it's like, okay, I don't even remember what I'd read. I'd have to start over again, and I wasn't enjoying it, so it just gets put aside and it gets dropped. In those kind of cases where it's just kind of grinding to a halt and there's nothing like personally, I'm probably not going to talk about it even on here where I obsessively talk about all my books. But books that I really dislike, incredibly loud and possibly close or whatever. I'm not even going to get the title right. Jonathan Safer Foe or whatever your name was, because that book really pissed me off. That was a book I hated so much I actually skim read to the end to confirm my hatred, and wrote something fairly vitriolical on my Goodreads account of just how much that book offended me on levels. So that was a case where I felt very perfectly fine saying, like, you know what? I didn't read this closely. It pissed me off so much that it defeated me that way, and that I skim read to the end. And I think that's actually a valid thing to say. Here's this very strong reaction that someone had. I don't expect to get published for that review. I don't expect that. That was my reaction, and that's why I'm here. I guess it's a reaction video. I don't know, reaction versus review. What is a review? I guess a review is if it's a measured, thoughtful, well thought through review. Well, then you're in the wrong place, because that's probably not the kind of reactions or reviews that I give. But I find it really tough to bail on a book, and it's an agonizing process. It takes me, people say, oh, there's the 50 or 100 page rule. It's like, it's not so much a rule as I don't want to give up. I want to get through. I've started a story, and a book really has to lose me, and it makes me feel bad. It makes me feel bad about myself for the most part, that I'm not. There's been some books that, of course, I can't even remember the name of the book, except that it had references. It was post-apocalyptic, and it had references to the Beachcombers in it. God, I can't even remember the name of the book. I'll link it down below if I can. But it's like, that was a well-written book, and it just failed to grab me on anything. And I read more than half of that book, but it just it didn't grab me. And people that I respect really loved that book, which I can't remember the name of. Which, I should at least say the name of the book. Of course, I don't have the book anymore, because actually I think I have an e-copy. Never mind. But yeah. So Steve, yes, I have a Catholic mother, so yes, of course I feel guilt about bailing on books, and I envy Shawn his no regrets. Goodbye. I envy him that, because I should be able to put things aside and not let them stew in my brain. But then again, stewing in my brain is why I come to reading in the first place. So there's good stewing, and then there's negative, vexing stewing. And yes, I think actually, Steve, you know what? That's another reason why I would say a bail review is good, because I think if I bail on something, if I DNF something, I'm using the two interchangeably, because to me they are interchangeable. I want to stop and think, why did that happen? How much of that is me? How much of that is the book? So that, for me, that is that is a good reason to stop and try and express myself and tell other people, in hopes that it'll help them in seeing that, yep, that guy's got issues, or yep, I can see why that guy had issues with that book. So yes, those are all the many thoughts on Bail that I have parasitically attached to Steve. I'm the parasite on the leech on Shawn, and hopefully we all got great nutrition out of that. More videos later.